Hello, adventurers. My name's Tyler.
And I'm Richard.
On today's episode, we'll be giving advice to new players interested in diving into the fantastical world of Dungeons & Dragons. Welcome to True Strike.
So, you want to play Dungeons & Dragons?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh, boy.
Your friends are all playing, and
Are
it
they?
sounds super interesting, right?
Yeah, it sure does.
We're going to tell you how to do that.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, Dungeons & Dragons has had a nice surge in popularity, I would say, since the lockdown. Because it started to gain popularity with the Netflix show Stranger Things, and then when everybody was locked up in their houses with nothing to do other than worry about the COVID-19s and didn't get to hang out with their friends as much, I think Dungeons and Dragons started to become really appealing because it was a game that people could play collaboratively over the internet and have a lot of good times.
Which that's a very interesting point you bring up. Playing over the internet.
Yeah.
Dungeons & Dragons is typically a game thought of being played in person, making believe with your adult and childhood friends all sitting around a gaming table. It translates pretty well to online, though.
Well, yeah, because a lot of people were using Zoom, so it was, real easy for you just to plop in with yourself sitting at your desk or at a table, so it kind of had that feeling of being at a table with your friends.
Right.
Yeah.
And luckily, a lot of us play using a thing we like to call the theater of the mind.
Yeah.
So all it takes is some well-descriptive words, some thoughts and some feelings, and some dialogue between friends, and you can picture the whole thing. Now, of course, there are other mediums, and we'll get to those, to have like a digital tabletop of sorts. But this video is something we wanted to put out as like a field guide for anyone looking to getting into Dungeons & Dragons for the first time.
Yeah, because even as popular as it is, you will still encounter many people in the wild that have only heard of Dungeons & Dragons because of things like Stranger Things.
Or the Dungeons & Dragons
or the
on our
Dungeons &
Monkeys
Dragons
movie.
Yeah, and we've actually had this question come up when we've been talking about it at work or out socially. People are like, yeah, what exactly is Dungeons & Dragons? And then obviously the next question is, well, how do I play Dungeons & Dragons?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? Do I have to buy a board?
Is this an app?
Is this like do I download something? Do I go to Barnes and Nobles and buy a box and I'm playing Dungeons & Dragons now? So yeah, it's a really good question. What do you have to do to play Dungeons & Dragons? And obviously this isn't like the definitive you have to do everything on this list kind of a situation here, but what we're going to be going over is the different things that you can do to approach Dungeons & Dragons, like how you would approach it as a new player or somebody who has maybe kind of delved a little bit but wants to get a little bit deeper.
Absolutely. And first off, I would like to bring up the official website that Wizards has been advertising themselves and pushing lately, called playdnd.com.
Yeah, so playdnd.com is their kind of jumping off point where you can kind of go in and start your adventure. And one of the very first things that they have on playdnd.com is to get yourself a D&D Beyond account.
Yes.
Yeah. So
which we highly recommend, even though we play home games in person most of the time. Sometimes we do play online. And no matter how we're playing, we always use dndbeyond.com. It manages your character sheet for you. It makes finding items much easier. If your dungeon master needs to do anything for editing your sheet or anything like that, it's all right there, easily accessible. And one of the best parts about it, in my opinion, is that the dungeon master can purchase a dungeon master subscription tier, and any books or anything they purchase will be shared amongst anyone else in the party, in the group. And then no one else has to fork over any money at all.
Yeah.
It's great.
But D&D Beyond isn't you don't have to have it. So you can still play Dungeons & Dragons without ever touching D&D Beyond. PlayDND.com does have that as the opener, right? So the very first thing that they show you is, hey, create an account through D&D Beyond, because obviously they do want people to use D&D Beyond, and it does make things incredibly easy and convenient.
With it, it's never been easier.
Yeah. But if you go past that, basically playdnd.com gives you some examples of what you can expect when going in. So they give you some very overview previews of some species and class selections. So you can kind of see like the the stereotypes. So the first three that are right there on the jump page are the human barbarian, the elf ranger, and the human fighter. So those are like the, your stereotypical fantasy setting kind of, this is the generic character, what you can kind of expect.
It's digestible for those coming in.
Easily digestible. So they kind of show you those so that it's a nice little opener. And then from there, they kind of show you some of their opening modules.
Yes.
Yeah, so they have like actual purchasable modules that you can go out and buy that are, your nice little enclosed box sets, which is why I say you don't have to have D&D Beyond. Because if you go buy one of their starter sets, which they actually have linked on playdnd.com, everything you need to play is in that little box set. I mean, you're getting, maps, you're getting a starter booklet, you're getting an actual set of dice, and you're getting character sheets. So you don't have to use D&D Beyond to use one of those starter sets. You can just kind of jump in with, I think the Lost Mines starter set is around $24.
Yes, Lost Mines of Foundelver is on there.
Yeah, I think it's $24, maybe $19 when it's on sale. And I think it's one of the first ones that they pitch to you on startdnd.com. playdnd.com as one of the easy jumping off points.
Yes, and that's a great one. It gets you into the Sword Coast and stuff like that. So you get yourself situated with what ends up being the focus of a lot of the modules.
Yeah,
is that area of land. But one of the more recent starter sets they're pushing a little bit, and it's fairly reasonable to get into. I believe it's $20. Is the Dungeons & Dragons starter set, Stormwreck Isle.
Yeah.
And my favorite part about this website and this starter module, for example, is they have a little choose your own adventure on the site. And you go through and you do like a little survey thing, and it kind of like, all right, what class would I like to play? And you answer some questions, and it's like, okay, you should be, based on your choices, a paladin. That would be cool for you. This is how paladins are. This is a brief description. Is that what you'd want to be? If you say yes, you go through this short little choose your own adventure, make a couple decisions, and then bam, it gives you this little backstory almost of the decisions you made, and it leads you right into the beginning of Stormwreck Isle. And if you and your full party, you all go on and do this, you can establish a backstory that you have kind of made with very little effort going into this very short campaign that could blow up to something bigger. And it's cool that they hold your hand just enough to let you make some decisions that influence the story, but also like, let's do this together.
Yeah, and right there, like he said, you jump into those campaigns, which are very short campaigns, but they're a good way to get your feet wet. And then from there, it very easily transitions over into D&D Beyond. So even if you're just using those materials that they give you in that starter set, it's very easy to either play those beginner modules in D&D Beyond. So if you're ready for the digital, you can transfer all this information over into D&D Beyond and actually use it during those campaigns. You could use the paper character sheets and everything that come with them, and then eventually transfer that over to D&D Beyond so that you can take those characters that you made for that starter adventure into bigger modules, or even, other types of games.
Or a home game that you've made up completely for yourself, etc.
Yeah.
But yeah, or just paper forever.
Yeah,
you can be a purist.
Yeah, you don't have to go with D&D Beyond, but D&D Beyond, it's never been easier.
Absolutely.
And we say that as a joke, and it is kind of like a running joke in the community, but it really is very convenient.
It's true. Everything I do D&D wise, I use D&D Beyond for, and without it, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah, it is so convenient how well it tracks everything, and how everything is put in a nice simple place. Because obviously using paper, that's how I started. There wasn't even a hint of D&D Beyond.
Yeah, computers didn't
in the
exist back then.
90s. Yeah, so when we played, it was all papers, right? So the only way for the DM to have any information was to gather up all our papers at the end of the game and take them from us. And then we didn't have our papers.
You didn't even know your own character.
Yeah, so you don't have your paper to reference. You don't have, your bag to look through or anything like that. But now with D&D Beyond, you have access to your character. If you want to go back and look at something, you want to look at a stat or something like that, or you want to, read something that you wrote down in your notes, and your dungeon master also has access to all of this as well.
Right.
So that's super cool. And then the other thing that you had touched on earlier was the tiers of dungeon master. So your dungeon master can own obviously a lot of books, and most dungeon masters out there are collectors in their own right. So
it doesn't start that way, but
yeah,
it quickly escalates.
They're buying modules and books, because that's what they do. And being able to share that down to your players is very convenient, because all of a sudden now, as a player, if you're in a game with a dungeon master that has access to all these different books, you now have this wealth of knowledge at your fingertips. You can jump in and reference a book, with just a simple download onto your phone or your tablet, or even just browsing it on the web with no download at all.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that's a big ask. Like, hey, new player, go find a dungeon master who already owns the content and is willing to share it with you. But if that's the case you're in, which actually happened to be me and Richard's introduction to D&D 5e, we had a dungeon master who exactly had that situation.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm going to run a campaign. You guys don't worry. You don't have to buy anything. I've got you covered. I'm just going to share the stuff with you.
Yeah.
And
all you have to do is make an account on D&D Beyond, and we're golden.
Yeah. And that's all it took. And it was amazing. And it worked out wonderfully. And thank you, DM.
Yes.
That was great.
Yeah.
Because of you, I've spent a lot of money myself on this website and am in the same pit you fell into.
Yeah. But not everybody is going to have that option. So you're not always going to have a DM in your area that is either going to make a dummy campaign for you to come in so you can look at books, or is going to actively run a campaign for you so that you can have access to those books while you play in that campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that's not always the case, but best case scenario. But if that's not the case, there are some books that you should probably pick up or look at.
Right.
Yeah.
And I personally think you should grab these, especially if you're the DM, but players as well. Physically is great to have these, just because these are your core books you will come back to, but they do sell them on D&D Beyond, and having them digitally is also a great choice, especially if you're in the digital revolution and you've got an iPad or whatever, and you can just pull this up wherever. But what I'm getting at is the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual.
Yeah.
These three are your religious text.
Those are your core tenets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you buy it physically, they sell a set called the Core Rulebooks Gift Set. I think Amazon typically has it for like $80.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that bad. It comes with a DM screen. It's a nice, pretty case, and it's just looks great on your shelf, and you will reference all three of these. Now, if you're a player only, really, you just need the Player's Handbook. You don't need the other two at all. But if you're going to be running games, you absolutely need all three.
Yeah. And a lot of people that start out as players will find themselves wanting to dip their toes into running games.
And you should.
Yeah. And it is a lot of fun when you do that, because it's a completely different aspect of the game. So, I mean, if you have the means, it's probably a good idea to pick up all three books. But if you're strapped and you can only buy one thing, obviously, if you're going to be a player, having your own copy of the Player's Handbook is great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that way you have it to reference. There's a lot of really great information in there, so it's nice to have.
Right. And by no means are we saying you have to drop money into this game to play it. You can learn through playing.
Yeah, there are a lot of free resources online
mm-hmm.
that tell you more about what you need to know on how to play this game.
But at this point, this is hopefully you're playing with an experienced DM and stuff like that. If you were looking to get in from the ground and have no outside source, yeah, you're either going to be looking for a lot of these free resources or probably picking up a book or two.
Yeah. And the books, they're not like insanely priced.
No, the
books are very reasonable. Yeah.
You can find those core books at Walmart for $20.
Yeah. So you're not looking at a huge investment, especially if you're just buying one book.
Right.
And obviously things are going to change. We've talked about this in the last couple of episodes too, about how, they're changing how we're going to approach physical versus digital and stuff like that. So in the very near future, you might be getting 2 copies of a book when you buy it, because they've talked about that in interviews before. I think Chris Perkins specifically has said that one of the things that they're looking at is digital codes inside of physical books. So there could be a very foreseeable future where when you buy that physical book, you also get a digital book in D&D Beyond. Yeah, which is exciting.
Yes, absolutely.
Because that way you have it in 2 mediums. You can have it to quick reference, pull up on your phone. Which means that you can search it, which is very cool. So having a physical book is awesome, especially if you're like a book collector or you're somebody that likes to have physical media in your hand. But one of the benefits of having a digital version on D&D Beyond is that you can actually quick search. So you can go in and search that book for terms. So if you want to find something fast, or if you want to look up a specific rule, it's a lot easier to do so digitally.
Yeah.
But physical is still a lot of fun, and sometimes people like to have that. They'd rather reference, an actual physical object that they can hold. But yeah.
Now I've heard it said recently by a podcaster that the best way to learn D&D is to know how to play D&D, and it sounds counterintuitive and such, but like podcasts are huge, and this isn't me just being like, hey, listen to our podcast, you'll learn how to play D&D. We have like a back and forth talking format. We're not necessarily teaching you how to play in D&D. However, please subscribe and listen to our podcast. We love you all, and we will try our best to teach you how to play anything.
Yeah.
But what I'm referencing specifically are the live plays. You've got your Dimension 20s. You've got your Critical Roles. You've got your Not Another D&D podcast, your Dungeons and Daddies, etc., etc., etc. Adventure Zone. Listening to these experienced players play teaches you more, in my opinion, than you could get by reading all 3 books cover to cover.
Yeah. There's a lot that can be gleaned from listening to, or watching in some cases, other people play D&D.
Now, granted, you might not know the nitty-gritty of every single rule and stuff like that. That's where the books come in handy, and just experience. But watching or listening to people just play the dang game is so influential in how speedy you can be, and how turn order works, and if someone uses terms, BBEG, big bad evil guy, roll initiative, you kind of like start to figure out what these are. Make me a dexterity saving throw. These are things you'll pick up on without ever looking at the rule book, and you can know what they mean at session 1.
Yeah, watching or listening to podcasts or videos or something like that is a little bit more organic way of learning these things.
Absolutely.
Because even when you're watching it or listening it, you don't realize how much you're picking up, because you're really keying in on character interactions and the actions that people are taking, and action economy. Because
that's
you get to really see the thought process that some people go through and how they interact with each other. And like I said, it might not seem like it at the time, but you're actually picking up a lot more than you probably imagine.
Yeah.
So watching these podcasts and listening to these podcasts is a really good jumping off point to kind of know what's expected as far as like, players in groups, and, what you can expect.
Right. And I know some things like Critical Role can be intimidating with hundreds of episodes and 4 to 5 hours each one. And
oh yeah, that's a lifestyle.
Yes, there's some deep dive stuff. And granted, campaign 2 of Critical Role might be one of the favorite things I've ever experienced in my life. Something like Dimension 20's Fantasy High is a very short, digestible show, but you still pick up so much in an entertaining fashion that you're not studying, you're not reading a book, you're not doing that, but you're learning the game through osmosis.
Yeah, we're not saying that you have to jump into an 1,800-hour commitment of a massive 3-year-long story arc from, celebrity DMs. There are tons of bite-sized live play kind of interactions that you can watch and listen to that have just as high quality as the big names, the Dimension 20s and the Critical Roles out there. There's a lot of them out there. I mean, there are so many Dungeons and Dragons podcasts and or live plays on YouTube and Twitch to choose from right now.
Yeah, and they all have their own take and spin on the game, and it's not always knights in shining armor fighting a dragon in a dungeon.
Oh no, of course not.
It really shows you it could be anything. It could be tiny Lego people, stealing some stuff from a vault inside a vent in like the kid's house. It could be demons in hell.
Yeah.
Like you could play as all kinds of things.
Spacefaring adventures.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. All using the same rule set. And so you're not tied down to anything with Dungeons and Dragons, though from the cover you might feel like you are limited to that, but you're not. You really, once you know the rule set, you can apply it to anything you want.
Yeah.
Now, let's say you have listened to some podcasts. You kind of have an understanding of this. Maybe you've bought a book or two and you want to get into the game. Well, one big recommendation out the gate would be visiting your friendly local game store and seeing if there's any groups looking for players or any like D&D nights. Sometimes local game stores will hold events specifically for teaching new players Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, and it might not even be something you even realize was in your local town. I know that when we started getting heavily into D&D a couple years ago, I started to go into the friendly local game stores that I always frequented, right? For other reasons, for board games or for card games or anything like that. And little did I know that over the years from the inception of the store, they had been hosting Dungeons and Dragons and people have been playing Dungeons and Dragons there the entire time. I never really knew about it. I never looked at the community board.
Right.
Yeah. So go check out your local game store, and a lot of them have a community board hidden somewhere on a wall where people are looking for players or people are looking for games. And then there'll also be a lot of times information about the schedule for that store, because a lot of these stores are sponsoring games. So they're, trying to get people to come in and play. And then there are some that are just independent groups that are using the tables that exist in that store and the play space to kind of be a friendly meeting place for everybody to get together and play their games.
Right. And if you're looking for something maybe a little more official, but still in the same location, Wizards does sponsor and host a thing called the Adventures League.
Yeah.
And that's been going on for years. And it's something where you go, and the rules are a little more strict, but that, sometimes a nice little box will actually help you get into something quicker. They're basically just making sure it's all approved rules and classes and stuff like that for making your character. It's one of those things that if you're actually interested in getting into Adventures League, I highly recommend just giving it a quick Google. All the information is right there. See if any of those games is happening near you. And I've never went to one myself. However, I've heard great things. And I know last time we went to PAX South, there were Adventures League sessions happening there.
Yeah, there was quite a few of them happening.
Yeah. So that's also something you could pursue.
Yeah, it's again something like he said I have never personally participated in, but I know people that have, and I've heard really good things about it. And like I said, it's a little bit different than sitting around a table with people that you do know, or maybe people at your FLGS. So it's a kind of a different experience because, like you said, it's a little bit more boxed in, just to be a little bit more regulated and make it a little bit more uniform of an experience for everybody involved.
But that allows you to just, once you've done it a couple times and you have your character, you could just show up and expect a similar experience.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a built-in thing where you can just keep going back to it. Right. So you're going to have a very samey experience, and you're going to know what to expect. And not to say that's not going to be fun. It's just going to be probably a different experience than playing with like your friends or playing, like a pickup game. Yeah,
and if let's say you were looking to DM, getting into that, they have pre-written sessions and modules and stuff that they're like, hey, this is the session that will be ran across the board tonight. And then that at that time, that day, many groups across, are all playing the same thing. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and it is very popular. I mean,
Yes,
when we
absolutely.
saw it at PAX, there was plenty of people. There was no shortage of people that wanted to play in Adventure League. So it is definitely something that is easily accessible if that's something you want to give a try.
Now, let's say you don't want to play with some strangers. The next best option here, let's be real. You got to bully your friends into doing this with you.
Yeah.
It might not actually take that much of a push.
No.
Most likely, if you're the type of person that would give Dungeons & Dragons a shot, you've got a pretty solid chance that your friends are in the same boat. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in Dungeons and Dragons, likelihood is that you've got at least one friend that shares similar interests to you, that has maybe even just a passing interest in what is Dungeons and Dragons, and could it be something that I could have fun with?
Right.
Yeah, and it might surprise you to find that you have more people around you than you knew that would be interested in it. And maybe somebody that doesn't think they would be interested in it could really be into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't take much, as far as in the way of playing to kind of see what it is. And I think that Dungeons and Dragons does have a way of subverting your expectations in some cases. And some people have a very narrow view of what Dungeons and Dragons is, right? And they're kind of like set in their way. But once they get more information on it, so they actually talk to somebody about it, and I hear this all the time when I'm talking to people about what Dungeons and Dragons is, and I tell them what it is, and I explain to them something that happened, and they're usually pretty amazed by it, and they're like, wow, that's not what I thought you were doing.
Yeah, they thought you were wearing a wizard's hat
Yeah.
and full-on robes. And
Well, yeah, it either goes one of two ways. It either goes to, you're that person that I saw throwing the orange-colored socks in the field at the park yelling fireball, or they're the person that you saw at the the bookstore over in the corner with mountains of books that looks like they're doing research and 150 dice that they just keep rolling randomly and then writing down statistics.
Right.
So it seems
But you're somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. People that hear about it, they're all like, "Oh yeah, I thought you were one of those camps." And then you tell them, no, this is kind of like what we did. And then, sometimes they'll ask for more information, and you get into telling them about a session that you had or a game that you had.
And I think that's the coolest part, is anytime I've ever told someone about Dungeons & Dragons, not once have I been like, yeah, and then I rolled a d20 and I added my +4 modifier to it, and I was able to avoid the fireball, so I only took half damage. No, it's, and then the dragon came in and it breathed fire all over all of us, and I was able to duck to the side just enough that I only took half damage, and I was the only one up, but there was just enough time to squeak over to the side and pour a health potion down the cleric's gullet, and you remember it the way your character remembers it.
Yeah,
which
you don't
is so
sit
fun.
there and go off of, like your initiative rolls and your, all these rolls that you did. Nobody tells the stories like that.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody tells the stories as, this fantastical adventure that they had.
Right.
And this funny thing that happened, or this epic thing that happened.
And when you bully your friends into doing this with you, these are going to be stories that you recall like that.
Yeah.
With each other.
Yeah. And it's not even just bullying your friends. A lot of times, because this has happened to us before, we've been around people that are friends of ours, and we've started talking about things that happened.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And we're talking about like, oh, there was this time that we did this thing and wasn't that funny, or we'll make a joke. And then, somebody will ask, like, well, that's a weird joke. Where did that come from? And then, like, oh, yeah, let's tell you the story about how I ran into this creaky old shed, and there was a rock on the ground, and I picked it up and I died.
I turned to dust.
And I turned to dust. And I was a ghost for a little while. And then, there's like this whole story that goes along with it. And, you kind of get people's interest peaked, because they're like, yeah, this is not what I thought Dungeons and Dragons was.
Yeah.
And then you can start bullying them.
It's not just math.
Yeah. And you can be like, no, this is so much better. I think you should come and sit down with us, or, let's just play a real quick game. We'll just like right now.
Oh yeah. If you're looking to get into Dungeons and Dragons and you're wanting to DM out the gate, you're definitely going to have to bully some people into doing this, because obviously at this point, you're the one that really wants to play, and you're willing to fall on that sword.
Yeah.
So one of the most important things you need to figure out before you start jumping into a game, though, and this is some personal reflection, self-reflection you got to do. What kind of D&D do you want to play?
Yeah, because there's a lot of different types of
Yes.
Dungeons and Dragons out there.
And we're not just speaking spacefaring combat versus elves in the trees or whatever.
Yeah, or even game systems that aren't Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. We don't talk about those here.
We don't talk about those here. We talk
they
about
do
Dungeons
exist,
and Dragons. But they do exist. No. But we're talking about what type of game you want to have. Like what kind of game you want to participate in, or maybe what kind of game you want to run.
And some of this will, through experience, I think it'll change as you grow as a player. But just going into it, what seems like what's piquing your interest? For example, are you wanting to get into this game because you like the idea of role play? Are you a drama kid that just really wants to speak out in a funny voice and welcome the people as they come by through the town, and maybe you want to take on some missions and save the fair maiden?
Or you want to be the character that min-maxes their character sheet to figure out your damage output and what's the most efficient way that I could take this turn to make sure that I crush that goblin's skull open before he has a chance to even look at me.
Or maybe it's somewhere in the middle and you're going to do a funny voice while you crush that goblin's skull.
You're going to do an accent while you roll some dice.
Now, you don't have to do an accent. You don't even have to talk in the first person. Typically, the way I play, Tyler, is I'll do an accent and I'll talk from the first person. And as I approach the barkeep, I pull up a stool and slide a piece of copper forward. I ask him what he's serving. But you can easily say, okay, then Rudy is going to, I guess he's going to approach the barkeep and he's going to sit down and he's going to ask what the barkeep is selling. And both are totally fine.
Yeah, neither one of those is the wrong way to play D&D.
Absolutely. And it's just whatever you're most comfortable with. But both accomplish the exact same thing. Now, maybe if you've got a whole table where everybody is really good friends, you've all got a lot of trust built up, and you're all role-playing your characters in the first person, that could be pretty fun. Personally, I think that's a great time because then you're all laughing and just having a wonderful time, or sad because you've really gotten into character. Maybe something terrible has happened in the story, but you could all 100% like moving pieces on a chessboard, be like, knight to e5.
Yeah.
and say what's happened, and your DM will describe it, and it's a good time no matter what.
Yeah, and there are tons of games out there that are both extremes and games that are a mix. So you kind of have to decide if you are the type of person that's going to go to play an adventure league, or you're going to go to your local game store and find a game of people to try and play with. You need to figure out what those games are and whether or not they're the type of game that you want to participate in. Because there are, DMs out there that like to run very combat heavy simulation style games. So that DM is building a world that is based largely on combat and the interplay of characters in combat. And I've seen like live plays that are like this, and I've seen a lot of games that are like this, and that's great for those players because that's what they're looking for.
Absolutely, yes.
But you have to kind of temper your own expectations of what you're going into in a game and know the kind of game that you're approaching.
That's huge.
Yeah, because if you decide that you want to be the heavy role play character where you're going to do everything in character, you're never going to talk about your character in third person. You're always going to be in character, and then you jump into a game where nobody else wants to do that, you might feel on the outs because it's not the kind of game that you were expecting. Mm-hmm. So that's where it's kind of important to decide how you want to play this game and make sure that the players that are at the table with you want to play a similar style game so that you make sure that you're having fun. Because that's the main thing with all of this, is making sure that you are going to be playing in the game that is fun for you. Mm-hmm. And it's the type of game that you want to play with and the type of game that you want to stick with. Because if you're not having fun, obviously, why do you want to be there?
Right. Trust is huge in this game. No matter how you play, trust is the most important thing to me. No one should ever give anyone a hard time, no matter how they choose to play. Yeah. As long as everyone's having fun. Session zeros are huge for this. Mm-hmm. They let you establish how everyone's going to be playing and your character and stuff. And if you get into a session zero and you don't like the vibe, talk to everybody, talk to the DM. And it's 100% okay to leave the table after your first session or two and just be honest that maybe it wasn't what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Or maybe some adjustments could be made. As long as everyone is having a good time, this game it's the best game. And you should never just deal with it because you're already there.
Yeah, because you're already there.
Yeah.
And you're not always going to have the opportunity for a session 0. But if you do, that's great, because session 0 is a really good place for everybody to set boundaries, to really kind of set the tone for the entire game. And that's what makes session 0s so very important, because it's really setting the stage for the rest of the game, however long it's going to be. But when you're coming into D&D as a new player, you might not have the opportunity to come into a session 0.
Yeah.
So if you're approaching the FLGS side of things, so if I'm a new player and I run into my local game store, I see something on the board where they're looking for an extra player. This is what they have as far as current players, and I was like, I'm really interested in playing a rogue, and this party doesn't have one, and they're 3 games in. Right. So I'm not going to get that session 0 experience, but that doesn't mean that you still can't know what you're getting into. Right. So when you go to a game like that, it is a good idea to approach the DM and kind of get a background on the game that's happening, so that you can almost have a session 0 of sorts. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be the same, but it's a way for you to know what you're getting into, because that way the DM can tell you what the expectations are and the type of game that it is. Because, you don't want to, like you said, you don't want to get into a game where you're not comfortable, where you don't want to be. And making sure that everybody knows each other's boundaries is very important in a game like Dungeons and Dragons.
Absolutely, yeah. One big thing that I've picked up on after spending a pretty extensive time both DMing now and as a player is communication between the Dungeon Master and Dungeon Master to the players. You almost can't do too much of it.
No.
And I know sometimes when you're making your character, you want to hide things. You want to hide it from everybody. If you want to keep some secrets in your backstory and stuff like that, I highly recommend bringing up most of it to the DM ahead of time. You don't have to give away maybe some no one expected this at all, but really the more you divulge between each other, the better the DM can fit you into the world and make sure that this game is going to potentially cater towards what you were expecting. And if it can't be done, and this is something that's going to make or break your experience, the DM could just tell you right then and there.
Yeah, and it's also not just you. It's other players at the table.
Absolutely.
Because if you have this idea of something that you want to do with your character, it's very important that you approach your DM with this, because I might have this really solid idea of something that I want to appear in my story, right? And I didn't really think much about it. It's just, I want to include this. This is very important to me as a backstory. And I approach my DM first, and I don't just drop it on the party in the middle of a game, right?
Yep.
It's very important, because if I approach my DM and I say this element of my backstory is important to me, that gives the DM the opportunity to come back at me and say, well, I get what you're coming from, and it's a really great idea, but we have a player at the table that is uncomfortable with that scenario.
Yes.
Because, like I said, it's not just about you, it's about the other players at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So the DM can then give you the information that you don't have, because maybe there is a player at the table that has established boundaries in a session 0 of what their expectations are and things that they would rather not be included in their story and in the fantasy story that they're involved in. And if you don't tell this to your DM and you drop it on the table, you could negatively impact somebody else's experience. Mm-hmm. So it is very important to share with your DM, so that way they know, they can give you a more information-based experience, so that whether or not what you're doing is something that's well for the game, or if it is and it's great, it's easier for them to integrate you into that world and to integrate you into that story.
Now, one big thing about that is this is a shared experience, like Richard mentioned, and you are not the main character. You're gonna have to let some things slide.
Yeah.
Now, like I mentioned, the communication. Maybe if everybody does talk to the DM, you can make it all fit. If you have an experienced DM that can weave this story to include everyone's vision of their character, it can be a rewarding experience for everybody, but not everything will make the cutting room floor sometimes, and you have to be accepting of it.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Now, let's say you don't have any friends. Let's say you don't live near a friendly local game store, but you have internet. Websites like startplaying.com are not a bad way to dive into D&D a bit.
Yeah.
Now, granted, a lot of DMs on there are very experienced dungeon masters that will charge a small fee, sometimes like $5 a session or more, depending on what they're running or skill level. And some people don't agree with this, that you should be charging for this service. Oh, Dungeon Master is just a game. You shouldn't. They put a lot of time and effort into setting these campaigns up and these sessions, and I don't see the issue with paying them for their service, especially if it's a service you're willing to pay for.
No, I don't find an issue with it at all. And it's actually there's kind of two ways to look at that argument. Number one being, yeah, they're providing you with a service. They're taking time out of their schedule to write a story for you, a completely unique story for you to weave your character into something. Right. But also, it honestly kind of helps as a screening process in some cases, because when you have a game and you're, trying to organize 5 people to get together in one location for one game, online or otherwise, it is kind of hard to get schedules to line up. And brutal honesty is, if somebody's paying for an experience, they're going to be more likely to show up.
Right. That's absolutely true. It's kind of like college. College versus high school. You're like, cool, man, I'm paying to be here.
Yeah, I'm paying to be here. I'm going to get my money's worth.
Yeah. Now, I just wanted to bring that up. We're not going to dive on that too long, but startplaying.com and other websites are definitely an option if you really want to get into the game, but you don't have another outlet. Or even if you do and you just want to maybe dive into some, I want to say, professionally ran sessions, maybe, like really get a firm start. You can go on there and read reviews from past players, and man, there's some people in there that I've considered, like, jumping in as a player for, and really see what these, very experienced DMs are like.
Yeah, and some of those games don't have to be a long-term commitment.
No, they've got one-shots galore on there. You can really just hop in for a game or two.
Yeah, so we're not talking like a massive monetary commitment for some of these games. It's, less than you'd spend on lunch.
Yeah, and see if you like it.
Yeah, to see if you like it.
Now, what's a good way, Richard, to get into a character and you're sitting in the car, or you're at home in the mirror, or sitting in your recording studio by yourself and it's 2 a.m. and no one but the dog is awake, and man, you just thought of a cool tabaxi.
So one of the things that I have heard from people is I want to play Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I want to play role play.
Yes.
Like, I want to get into my character.
Right.
That's the most interesting thing to me, is the acting aspect of it. To go sit down and be somebody else for 2 hours, for 3 hours.
Yeah.
But then they immediately realize that they have no idea how to approach that, because they're nervous. And actually, the first time that I ever played Dungeons and Dragons, when I was younger, I think the first game that I ever played, I was probably around 14 or so. My biggest fear was, I watched, my sister and her friends play Dungeons and Dragons before I ever played. Yeah. And I watched them role play. And the games then, when I started, were extremely role play heavy. There was combat, there was dice, but not anywhere near the amount of combat that I've played in the more recent games in 5e. These games were heavy roleplay games. So immediately my first fear was, how am I going to do that? I can't be somebody else. I feel silly. Even the idea of talking in another voice or using an accent or pretending to be somebody that I'm not makes my skin crawl, and I don't know how I can do that. People are going to make fun of me. They're not, nobody in the group is going to like it. Everybody's going to be laughing at me after the game is over and everything like that. And that's so not true for this game. Most
Right.
of the time you get into these games with these people, everybody has that fear. Almost everybody. But nobody's laughing at you. And the best way to get over it is to practice.
And if they are laughing at you, they need to leave.
Yeah, they need to find a different group.
At the very least, if you get there and that's kind of the vibe, you're at the wrong table.
Yeah, you're
my
at
friend.
the wrong table. You got to find a new table.
Yeah.
But yeah, the best way to do it is to practice. And I now am to the point where I do feel comfortable stepping into my characters. But those characters have to be developed somewhere, right? And like I said before in a previous episode when we were talking about our Curse of Strahd characters, where nobody knew our characters until session 0. So nobody heard Trist's voice until session 0.
Including me.
Same thing happened with Victor in Acquisitions Incorporated game. Nobody knew who Victor was. Tyler, as my DM, saw my age on the paper. You saw my character. The other players had no idea anything about this character. And then all of a sudden, it comes around to my turn to do introductions. And I introduce him and I give the descriptor of what he is. And then immediately start talking in an old man voice. And everybody's like looking at like, what? What is happening? And oh my God, this is going to be 2 years of this old man.
That's exactly how I felt about Trist.
Yeah. And so
Ooh, and that's just starting.
with those characters, it wasn't just instantly. I didn't just turn on Victor.
Yeah.
I didn't just turn on Trist on session 0. I had to get there. Right. And how did I get there? Was practicing. I got there by thinking about the character that I wanted, thinking about the way that they were going to talk. And when I'm driving in the car alone or I'm sitting at my desk working or something like that, I talk to myself. You talk to yourself. You talk to an imaginary friend. You can imagine your character in a situation and how they would react to that situation. It's weird. I am not an actor. I am in no movies,
Right.
so I have no way to speak on actors' behalves and how they train themselves to be these characters. I just know how I do it, which is, I like to imagine my character in a situation, and then how would that character react in that situation? And this is all purely hypothetical because I have no idea what situations my D&D DM is going to put me in.
Right.
But this way, I get to practice my character, and it sounds ridiculous.
I mean, especially when you're creating your backstory stuff, your character has been through some moments before coming to this game.
Yeah.
So you can go through these scenarios. And as someone even running a game, the amount of voices I've developed just while driving long distances and been like, okay, I really want to introduce a small spider that wants to unlife itself. What would this spider say? And it's like, okay, ooh-wee, hit me with a spell scroll and take me out, in me now. And I'm like, okay, but it's a tiny spider. Ooh-wee. And you just start trying to squeak the voice down more and more. And I think it literally took 2 or 3 days before I can talk like this. And then ooh-wee, roll me with a spell scroll and smack me across the face until I'm not around. Ooh. And it hurt. And about a week of
no pain, no gain.
A week of speaking like this, and now I could do it for hours without any issue. And that's one example of many. There are many voices that you just kind of learn how to do by practicing over and over again. And none of it's necessary.
No.
Like we said before, you don't have to do voices.
Yeah.
But man, voices are fun.
It's a lot of fun.
It's so fun.
And I think that a lot of people do want to play a game like that, but they feel intimidated by it.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to approach it. And it's just something that, I mean, you all done it. Don't you sit there and tell me that you haven't spoken in a silly voice.
Oh, for sure.
To your dog, to your cat. I know your cat has a voice that you use when you're talking to just that cat. All you have to do is pretend that you're now a tabaxi.
Oh, no.
And that's your voice.
I talk to my cat in my voice. My cat talks to me like this. My cat wants to know why, human, you have not fed me tonight. And I'm like, I fed you this morning. And she's like, that's not good enough, human.
Yeah. So I know you've done it.
Yeah. Now, a great example is my wife. our first campaign that she had played in, the Acquisitions Incorporated, she wanted to do a Valley Girl accent. And you can attest to this after we played with her for a couple of years. Not once did she do a Valley Girl accent. What it was, hey, everybody, I'm Klepto and I'm very quiet. And it canonically established that she was a very shy and quiet character.
And it worked.
Yeah, it became the character. That's not what she envisioned at all. I think on night one, she was intimidated by sitting in a group of, even though she knew all of us and we were all friends, she didn't have the trust built up yet. But after 2 years of listening to the rest of us do goofy voices and never judge anyone for it, she came into a second short-lived character with the kind of funny voice, a little bit. And then now we're starting off this campaign and she's like, hey, bros, what's going on? Everybody. And she's like totally committing.
Yeah, and she's committing to the bit.
And that is not something I ever would have expected to have actually happened.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Yeah. And you don't have to do this. So, we talk about sitting in the car and practicing in your mirror and talking to your cat and having your cat talk back to you. I actually have a character that I didn't have a voice for. My little chef, Fitch.
Oh my God.
He did not have a voice.
No, every session his voice changed.
I tried, I was like, I got to come up with a voice for Fitch. And then I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do for Fitch. So I was like, I'm just going to wing it. And whatever voice comes out of me at the table when the introduction happens, that's Fitch's voice. And it didn't quite work out that way.
Not at all.
He had a voice that session. I think the next session, he was kind of like a young Victor.
Yes.
So Victor was still there, but now just, shave off about 30 years. It was, Victor in his 30s. And then the session after that, there was I don't know, he kind of sounded like Morty. It was a little bit all over the place. It took about 4 sessions before Fitch started to really kind of have a unified direction. And even then, it was very loose.
And what I find interesting about this is you started this little bit off with, you don't have to practice the voice. You just gave the best example of why you should practice the voice.
Yeah, I'm just saying that wasn't horrible.
No, I mean, I gave you crap for it, personally.
Yeah. Everybody was all like, wait a second, who's talking? That sounds like
Victor.
Victor.
That's not Fitch.
Like, no, that's Fitch, I promise.
Yeah,
and then
what's funny is you just said that in Fitch's voice.
Yeah, exactly. Because
you've landed on Fitch's voice.
Fitch got his voice eventually.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen in advance like it happened with Victor, like it happened with Trist. And Nith didn't have a voice.
No, Nith was Richard.
Nith was me.
Yeah.
So Nith
Which
was
is fine.
my character insert when we first started playing. And when we first started Rime of the Frost Maiden, I didn't have a plan for Nith for a voice. I just didn't.
Yeah.
So it was all like, okay, he doesn't need one because he's just me.
I didn't. This was when we didn't have the books. We didn't have anything. We just made a D&D Beyond account, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this was a scenario where we basically got bullied by a friend into playing with him. And man, I am so glad that happened.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we're literally making a Dungeons & Dragons podcast every week now because we love this game so much.
Yes,
and
because we love it so much.
Garrett is the one that introduced it to us in this sense. Richard played back in the 90s, but he barely remembers that.
It's such a blur.
So I also didn't go to that game with a voice, but as I was introducing my character, and I'm like, okay, I'm a tall dragonborn. I made the mistake of being like, I have plate mail, because that's how I imagined it. I didn't have plate mail. I didn't know that. No one corrected me. Eventually I got plate mail. Stats matter. But he just let me describe the character the way I imagined it, which was great. And then it was my voice, but I talk a little bit lower, which as an edgy paladin was fine.
It worked.
And that was nice. And man, do I have so many characters in my mind. I have a tiefling girl named Squibbly Boop that one day I'll play. And she speaks very soft-spokenly. And she's super shy. And she's just, as long as nobody kicks her out of the team, she'll just be really happy to be here. And I want to play that character so bad. And I have so many ideas for her. And I've practiced that voice. And I just do it in the car. Because that's my space. And the commute to work is great for this.
Yeah, it's really good. But like I said, you don't have to do that.
I think we've spent half this podcast teaching people how to get into D&D on how to do funny voices.
On how to do funny voices. Well, I think that it is a big hurdle for a lot of people.
You know what? Aside from just doing it, just committing and actually playing D&D, and this is a wonderful area where it's nice to have friends, because if you are getting into this alone, maybe there's more hurdles. If you're getting this with a buddy, you can both just push each other because it's going to be fun. You're going to have a good time. But yeah, no, you've got a great point. Outside of just actually playing D&D, the next big hurdle I see is, are you going to roleplay?
Yeah.
That's a good point. Now, one big thing I want to bring up, and we've mentioned it here and there already, but if you really want to play D&D and you're willing to put in the effort, you've listened to some podcasts, you've bought the books, you still can't find a group that, you know, vibes with what you're wanting, or there's just not one in your area. I know I mentioned bullying your friends into playing D&D, you know, stuff like that. Don't actually bully them, you know, you could talk them into, etc. But if you are willing to fall on the sword and be the hero
That I know you are,
you can DM. And wow, does DM feel nerve-wracking. I played through an entire campaign, listened to over 500 hours for real of Critical Role. I had read books. I had watched YouTube videos, tutorials. Running the first session of our Acquisitions Incorporated campaign was one of the most nervous times in my life I can remember. And I think the next 50-ish sessions after that, I felt the same. And just starting Curse of Strahd, I felt the same until about 15 minutes before we played. Now, there's a big improvement there. Richard, and feel free to shoot me down, how was that first session of Acquisitions Incorporated? My first game running ever.
So that's the funny thing is you tell me how terrified you were and how you feel that you were ill prepared.
Yeah, literally ill.
And my memories of session 0 for Acquisitions Incorporated were almost flawless. Everything just worked and everything was perfect. There was never a point where we got to a position where you didn't know where we were going and you didn't know what was happening. So it seemed very well put together. I don't remember any part of it feeling like there was any flip-flopping or any squirming on your behalf. It was very well done.
The biggest thing to remember if you are running your first session is that whatever you say is kind of just what happens.
Yeah.
So if your players are like, oh, what's over here? And you say, oh, there's nothing, or it's the wall, or it's another area of the town. Oh, you're running a campaign, you're running a module, and they have to go left, but they choose to go right. Well, the thing that was to the left is now on the right.
Yeah.
You just make it work.
You move the goalpost.
You move the goalpost. And as long as you were fluid, now you run into a really interesting position here of like, do you prep everything? Do you spend weeks prepping? Your session 0, maybe. Your session 1, maybe. I 100% don't blame you. Prep as much as you need to do to feel comfortable. And once you feel comfortable, you're good to go. But after that, you can absolutely just know where the goalpost is or what the goalpost is and where you're starting that session and make it up from there. If you can improvise and you feel comfortable with that and your players feel comfortable with that, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And it's easier than you think it is.
100%.
It's way easier than you think it is. And at the end of the day, you're playing a game. You're there to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
So being a dungeon master, as daunting as it sounds,
Super daunting. Daunting master.
It's not as high stakes as you think it is. Because you're building a world,
Yeah.
and you're asking your friends to play in your sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as everybody's having fun and they're having a good time, then it's a success. Are you going to make mistakes? Probably.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Everybody's going to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you handle them well and you keep the flow going, it's not as bad as you think it is.
Speaking of podcasts, though, and this is a dangerous subject, and I want to emphasize this. your DM / you, if you are the DM, is not Matt Mercer. Probably. It's not Brennan Lee Mulligan.
No.
Most likely. Is it Abrea? Maybe. You don't have to be these people to be an amazing dungeon master. You can learn from these people.
Yeah,
and
of course.
Pull apart little things they do and mannerisms and the way they build worlds. The way Matt can describe the details of a scene is unparalleled. The way Brennan can make stuff up on the fly without any effort is
his impeccable wit.
It's so good. Abrea, with her willingness to bend the rules even in a scenario where it works for the player's enjoyment, is commendable. And you should never, ever give someone hate for running you a game and not being one of them.
Yeah.
Especially when they're learning. But ever. Now, Dungeon Masters. Your players are not, most likely, Liam O'Brien,
Travis Willingham,
Sam Riegel.
Yeah.
Like, you don't expect them to be professional voice actors or professional professional Dungeons and Dragon players. Don't expect this of them. As long as all of you are on the same level, going into this with trust and expecting the same from everybody to just have a great time, that's what's going to happen. Don't put pressure on yourself and don't put pressure on the others.
Yeah.
Just play the game, and I promise it gets better every time you play.
Yep. It's real easy to have a good time if you let it.
Yes. Now, if episodes like this are something you are interested in, please let us know either on the YouTube comments or anchor.fm/TrueStrike. Maybe hit us up on Twitter or Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. You could shoot us down. You could build us up. Whatever you want to do. We just want to hear from you guys.
Yeah.
Now, in the future, we'll probably jump into some episodes maybe themed around building characters or choosing the right species or class for you, and just little tidbits and advice from us on things like that in that nature. I had a great time filming this episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Anything else?
No, I think we covered everything.
Okay. I'm sure we didn't, but we'll tackle that next time.
In the meantime, go out and play some D&D.
Yes. Don't let anything get in your way. If this is something you want to do, this hobby is amazing. The community is amazing. And this could, for real, just either be a game to you or it could be a lifestyle. Either is fine. And they're both fun and acceptable.
Yep.
But, till then, I've been Tyler.
And I've been Richard.
And we've been
True Strike.
Hey, adventurers. Thanks again for joining us today. Please be sure to give us a follow on your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. If there's anything you'd like to write into the show, you can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram. New episodes released every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening to True Strike.